Don't fuck up. Don't fuck yourself. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Rude Cooking School podcast. I'm your host, back from the dead, John Hauser III. I'm back from the dead like a zombie in Zombieland. I don't know. I'm so excited I can't even fucking bring myself to think of Return of the Living Dead. The big slime monster that comes out. They hit him in the head with the baseball bat. He eats the dude's brains with the fucking mohawk. The greatest movie ever. Anyway, I'm going to just say it's good to be back. I missed you. I wanted to hug all of you, but that would be really creepy. So I'm just coming back to say hi, and we're back, and we're going to kick it off in a major way with an author, a writer, a historian, a sharp dresser, a person who has been on the podcast before, and a person who has an amazing book. Welcome back, Cara Mae Harris. How's it going?
Great. Thank you for having me back here.
Hell yeah. It's been a while. I think we were talking, it's been like 4 years, I think.
Yeah, it was definitely pre-pandemic. I can't even remember what I had going on back then.
Was it the first book?
No, because I put my first book out just last year.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah. Then yeah, maybe it was just for shits and giggles, but you were definitely here in person like you are now. So definitely before. You're the first guest to be back in person.
Yeah, I didn't realize that. That's such an honor.
Yeah, I was like, hey, you can stay home. And you're like, nah, fuck it. I'd get out of the house much, so let's do it.
Yeah, and then also the technology problems, if they happen, they're not my fault. So
yeah.
That is nice.
We did a whole episode with a friend of ours, and I had to scrap it. Like, this was like months ago, just because, you get the thing where it's like, like that whole thing. It's like, okay, well, bad connection. So
yeah, bad connection, barking dog.
Barking dog is just gonna bark. So if Olive starts going ape shit right now,
and it's not my fault. So
well, if it's your dog, it's still endearing. People will put up with a podcast dog. I've realized,
okay.
I listen to a lot of podcasts that they have dogs. Like Kevin Smith does podcasts all the time, and he would just literally just turn around and just start like, "Can you stop it?" Like just yelling at his dog. It's like, okay, we've all been there. So.
Oh, I had no idea. I primarily use the Zoom and stuff in work context, so I'm used to that. Where it's like, oh, I'm so sorry. The mail's here.
Yeah, I don't miss. I have, my boss had us coming in like 5 minutes after he saw on TV that people were starting to come back from to the office. So I've been almost 2 years now in the office, so I don't even remember what Zoom office calls are like anymore. We got one person that still Zooms in because she lives in a different state, and then she's talking, and all of a sudden her cat just jumps on her shoulders or whatever. It's like, oh yeah, I remember that. Except instead of a cat, it would be a child. Yeah. Yeah.
The Zoom celebrity pets still totally a thing.
Oh, really?
Cats just putting their butt in the screen in the middle of a meeting, and everybody having a laugh.
Everybody's like, oh,
yeah.
Babies and dogs, yeah. Or you're dumb, like your boyfriend or girlfriend doesn't know that you're actually on a call, and they just walk behind you in their underwear or something.
Oh yeah, I haven't had any of that. I don't think. Trying to think if anybody's kid did anything funny, but. None of those real exciting stories that you hear about.
Crosby's definitely come in on Leanna a bunch of times, like, Mom, can you guys? And she's like, he's like, oh, sorry. He just didn't realize. So now she has a sign that she puts on the door, like, I'm in a meeting. Can you wait? That kind of thing. Only come in if it's an emergency. So
yeah, and he's old enough to get it.
Now he just doesn't. Now he's just like, I don't need you. I'm good. So let's talk about, do you want to talk about the old book, or you want to talk about the new book?
So the old book wasn't even supposed to be, I put a lot of work into it. Don't get me wrong. I was obsessed with it while I was putting it together, but it was kind of not meant to be like my first book or anything like that. It took on a life of its own. But everything in that book, except for maybe some wording in the introduction, everything was already on my blog. So I just picked, it's kind of a best of, and I just wanted to, digital printing is so amazing. You know, you can put out an amazing book and print one copy of it. So I just wanted to make it basically for myself, and I figured I'd print some for other people, but then they continued selling and people still care about it. But the whole time I've been really thinking of this book, of Festive Maryland Recipes, as like my real first book, you know,
Really?
because I sat down and wrote it. There's a few things in here that are previous, you know, information that I already had, or pieces that I already wrote, but a lot of this was totally new research and new recipes. So it's not stuff that's already on my website.
How many recipes was that last book?
Oh, I don't even know, because I didn't even think of that in terms of recipes, because some of the recipes, it's like, you know, take some flour and sugar and
Yeah.
put it in the oven till it's done. And like,
Yeah.
so I didn't even think of it in terms of recipes. I think there's about 40 blog posts, that were in there, and it's like 104 pages.
Okay, so it's almost double what this book is, because this book is like 50. I got like it's 55 altogether, but that's including like the title page and all that stuff. So
well, like as a book, it's 104 pages. I think the digital spreads are like
that makes sense.
But it has less. It has less stuff. There's like 22 recipes in it, I want to say, and it has so much imagery, and the essays.
It's a beautiful
fleshed
book.
out, and since an actual designer made it instead of just me, it's not like trying to cram as much information onto the page as you possibly can, which is what I was doing with the other book. So this has a lot more thought into literally every aspect of it.
I love that you anticipated the Barbie aesthetic.
Oh yeah, that's all. Sarah Tomko, the designer, which makes sense for her to be on trend for things, you know, be ahead of the curve.
It's really cool looking. Like,
the reason we chose the color scheme is specifically because we didn't want to evoke a specific holiday.
Right.
Because this covers all of the holidays happen to be in the fall and winter and through the spring, just because that's what humanity does basically. But we didn't want it to evoke any specific type of, you know, Christmas colors or anything like that. But we still want it to be really you know, festive, which is literally in the title. So yeah, that's why we chose the pink and the other bright colors.
Yeah, it's really well laid out. It's really easy to read. The one thing that when I was going through it, the one thing that I really liked about it was the fact that it wasn't, you know, 400 different recipes. You know, like it didn't seem, this seems like a book I could actually cook from.
You know, I've thought about that a lot because I've been reading different things. I'm always reading things about food writing and trying to be a better writer. And they'll often have things about the cookbook business. And it really does seem like there's an impetus where you have to have 100 recipes in your cookbook and just cram as much in there as you possibly can. And, you know, they don't have any room to breathe. You don't know how much thought went into them, or if the people who, like, I want recipes that the people who develop those recipes are still using them themselves.
Yeah.
Not stuff they just threw together for a book. Or
just content, you know, like, okay, so do you read the Food Lab at all? Kenji?
I've seen it. Yeah, I've read it. I think I used their pasta, their fresh pasta recipe.
So like they're kind of my go-to, and Kenji Alt Lopez is one of my favorite writers and cooks. It comes at it from a perspective that I really enjoy. That's like, you know, scientific and also super test every recipe, that kind of thing. But his cookbook is like this thick. It's like I can't.
It's
overwhelming.
That was a shame with that book. I checked it out from the library, and I almost wish it was in little volumes because the way that he writes, it's a book you do just want to read, and you can learn so much from it just picking it up and reading it. But it's like a phone book. It's like a
No,
textbook
it totally
for philosophy
is.
class or something, and it's too heavy to like lay in bed and read it. So I never finished reading it. But there's a lot of totally great stuff in there to improve your cooking.
As an instructive book, it's amazing. As just a book, like as a book that like, okay, I'm gonna just make blah today. I'm sure that there's a recipe in it, but sometimes going through the book is like, you're like, oh God. Like, I know that sounds stupid, but like just having a giant book sometimes is like a little too much.
Yeah, I think if you use cookbooks, you kind of develop a relationship with them. So you're not necessarily, although I have done this, you can go to the index and look for a thing, but part of it's like, it's there already. And you're like, oh yeah, finally this will be a time to make that recipe that I've been, on the other page of the other thing I make all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So something that's like that huge, you can't really like remember what's in there without opening it all the time.
Yeah. There's one book I cook from a lot, and it's crazy because it's not a terribly big book, but it's an old Jamie Oliver book that I have that's seasonal. And it was like a TV show they had in the early 2000s. And I cook from that stupid book all the time. And it's not big, and it's seasonal, so it's like sectional, and each section only has maybe 20 recipes per section.
That format that you're talking about, that reminds me of Edna Lewis's cookbook, which I like a lot, and hers is the same way. It's not crammed full of recipes because it's all food that had meaning for her, that she knew how to make, or that she grew up making. So it's not like just stuff that they're throwing on the table at the restaurant or whatever. But I have to come clean and say part of the reason, of course, the book is small is because like it's self-published and we have limited resources.
But I kind of really enjoy the fact that it is small like that, though. You know what I mean? Like it's something that you could totally read in section. Like it's not daunting. It's accessible, and I appreciate that instead of getting, a lot of this stuff that comes out today in cookbooks is just like, oh well, let's follow trends. Right. So let's follow trends. Let's put as much content as we can in there that, let's be honest, most of the people that write the books, they're not doing themselves anyway.
Yeah. Also making it larger, we would run the risk of trying to let's cover every tradition that anyone in Maryland has ever done.
Right.
So we, if we had 100 things in there, then there would be the like 3 things that weren't.
Right.
So that would be a whole other can of worms, which obviously, we can only ever scratch the surface, which is all I'm happy to do.
Yeah. But the fun part is it kind of leaves it open to explore deeper, if you wanted.
Yeah, I certainly hope so. That's definitely the intention.
What was the impetus for writing just like a book based around food traditions of like the holidays and the holidays of, different religions, different cultures, that kind of thing?
It evolved. Originally, it was going to be a zine and it was going to just be Christmas recipes. And it was I have this recipe database that I made of Maryland recipes and it has like 50,000 recipes in it. So I can just go in there and type Christmas and you'll have a bunch of standard stuff that you would know, Christmas eggnog, Christmas oyster stew. But there's also like somebody's random Christmas cake that they put in like a community cookbook, that one person would make some weird cake with, coconut and nuts or whatever. They're very specific.
The thing they were known for.
Yeah, they're very specific thing that they did that is their personal tradition. And I love that so much. Those are the recipes that I want to try. So it kind of just evolved, as it grew into something larger, almost certainly because of the pandemic and the time that I had to work on this. So it just evolved into something larger. But that was the original idea. It's not necessarily like, this is how people in Maryland celebrate Christmas. It could just be this is this lady's cake that she made.
Right.
And there's a little of both in the book.
Yeah, because the recipes are actually, they're not like shticky, right? They're like, some of these are like real. They're not like, oh, look at this crazy shit people in the back in the day used to make. Like there's some stuff that you look at, you're like, oh wow, that's interesting. I don't think that people would think to make something like that today, but these are actual recipes that look good.
You know, a lot of that is actually Rachel Rappaport, the recipe developer. That's her influence. I chose a lot of the recipes, but she also helped steer me away from some of the things that I was originally going to put in there. That, in particular, the one I can remember was soup with carp in it, which is a big Czech tradition, you know, and I have this recipes from Little Bohemia cookbook, and they had the soup in there, and it seemed so intriguing to me, but you can't get carp.
No.
So it would be really pointless to kind of put in there or just confuse people. You'd have to do weird substitutions. So there's a few things, you know, that's not necessarily weird and out there, but it isn't accessible. So we try to make stuff that's a little bit more accessible, and that people would want to make. And in some cases, like the plum pudding, Rachel actually took the recipe and turned it into something more that people would want to make.
Right.
Because plum pudding is this really heavy, you know, dense, weird
that takes forever to make.
rock that takes forever to make and costs a ton. It has so much stuff in it.
Pour so much liquor into it over the time.
So she took that and, you know, turned it into something that maybe you could just have that evokes plum pudding a little bit as a self-saucing cake.
I was going to say, like, it would be interesting to do a book where you took those eclectic, like, forgotten weirdo recipes and updated them for a modern palate. Like, I remember I was writing something for The Sun, and they wanted to do a version of Hausner's strawberry pie.
Okay, yeah.
And I updated the recipe, and the person who would, because back then I would write recipes and then they would have somebody who would make the recipe and photograph it. But she was also kind of a tester, and she wouldn't, she was like, I'm not doing this. I was like, what do you mean? She's like, no, this is like a historical famous thing. You can't change this. And I'm like, nobody's going to eat, because I have a book that I think the city put out it with, I think, Jay-Z back in like 1981. Like the forward for the book is like Marty Bass or something like that.
Oh, is it the WJZ?
No.
On the cover? I have that one.
It's a really weird shaped book.
Oh, you'll have to show it to me sometime. But yeah, the Hausner strawberry pie recipe is one of their few recipes that really is circulated, and it would get printed in the Sun, and people would write into the Sun and ask for that recipe. So I could see if you had a lot of experience with that, expecting backlash to changing that, because the people who read those recipes and have it in their kitchen, they are going to get mad.
Well, when I wrote it though, like it was like one of those things where it's like, okay, I know that you think it's this, but it's so heavy and it was so like cloyingly sweet because I made it from the recipe that I had. That was their official recipe, and it wasn't good. Like, so it was just kind of heavy, and I just kind of updated it. And I just found it funny that the photographer was like, I'm not doing this. I'm going to make it the way it is and take pictures of it. I'm like, okay.
Well, you know, an interesting thing about that strawberry pie recipe is you hear people who talk about how much they loved their strawberry pie at Hausner's, and they remember it. They remember going there and eating it. But I never hear people who say, my mom always makes this Hausner strawberry pie recipe and we love it. So I'm not so sure that the recipe that made it into the public is necessarily what people are getting.
I don't think so.
And if it was, you know, they took something
why
out.
would they?
Yeah, and people just don't, I don't hear a lot of people like, oh yeah, we make this all the time.
But it was a pain in the ass to make too, and that was one of the other reasons I changed it.
Okay, yeah, that's always another good reason. I remember, I think it's like 2 feet high, basically piled with strawberries.
It was a big fucking pie, yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, that would be fun. But I was looking through this, and like a lot of this stuff, like I'm definitely gonna make that stuffed ham recipe. I've never made stuffed ham. My wife went to St. Mary's College.
Oh, yeah, and they serve it in the cafeteria there.
But when she went there, she was a vegetarian.
Oh, okay.
So she never had it. And she's like, I've heard it's amazing. I think I might have had it once, but I don't remember it. I remember the one that I had was spicier than I thought it was going to be. And I was like, oh shit, this actually, like, it's not just kale and oysters and a ham? Because I had heard there were oysters in it too.
Yeah, there's not in. There are old like stuffed ham or stuffed meat recipes that have oysters in them. But St. Mary's County stuffed ham doesn't. I don't have any recipes that have oysters. I could see why they'd be there,
Right? Because they put oysters in everything.
But yeah, some of those, and it adds more umami just to the. It's like adding fish sauce kind of. But yeah, some of those recipes have a good kick to them. When I make it, I use what are the
Cubanelles?
The dried peppers from like the Mexican section. Going completely blank. Oh, the chile de arbol.
Okay. Oh yeah, those. Yeah.
Yeah, they have a lot of heat to them, and I just grind those up because it's like the freshest red pepper that you're gonna get, unless you're ordering red pepper all the time, like straight from Penzeys. It kind of loses its kick after a while. So
yeah, I was looking at that ham recipe and I was like, this is totally doable. And I like that in the recipe it was saying something like, kale can get a little bitter. Don't use that. Use the mustard greens and the watercress. And I don't know if that's traditional. Is that like a traditional thing?
The greens, there's actually so much variation in the greens
I can imagine.
People use, and there's some, I forget which way it goes, but there's a local lore says that like the further south you get, the more cabbage heavy it is, I want to say. I could have that backwards. And the further north, the more kale. But old recipes, they probably just use whatever they could get. So they have watercress. Sometimes they have shallot or onion tops in it. Mustard greens. It's just kind of, whatever. And that's kind of how I do it. I go to the farmer's market and get whatever looks good that day. But that's, my ham wouldn't really pass mustard down in St. Mary's County.
You don't think so?
No, I mean, there's the people who make stuffed ham usually have been making it their whole lives. It's such an ingrained local tradition. And I do want people to try it. But part of the joy in trying to make a stuffed ham is that you're getting so much respect as you do it for the people who really know what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And which, when you try a cooking thing, it's not always about like having the most success. Sometimes it's just about experiencing the act, for me anyway,
Absolutely.
the act of doing it. So making the stuffed ham, like I get it with the bone in, and then I debone the ham, which is like a huge pain. But as I do it, I'm like, man, I can just imagine like a butcher just swiftly doing this, with like 5 quick cuts, and moving on to the next ham. And the same for making all the slits to put the greens into and the ham. So it's kind of a experience, I think, that anybody who is really interested in all this regional food, it's something worth trying.
Yeah, like it's like if you make ramen from scratch, like it takes 3 to 4 days, like it's
and then you have an appreciation of ramen,
right?
Yeah, exactly.
Where you're not just like, whatever, like you're like, holy shit, like it takes a long time.
Yeah, because if you drive through St. Mary's County, you could just think, oh yeah, stuffed ham, that's like I can get at the grocery store. I mean, it's valuable because it costs like $20 a pound, but
does it really?
There in the grocery, I'm not sure what the current going rate is, but it's not cheap.
So for those who don't know what we're talking about, can you explain stuffed ham? I think you did last time, but it's always good because stuffed ham is a thing that I didn't even hear about up until like maybe 10 years ago.
Yeah, I found it in the Southern Heritage Maryland's, like they had a Maryland spring dinner in one of their cookbooks, these cookbooks that my mom had, but I didn't grow up eating it. It's very specific to St. Mary's County and according to my cookbook collection, to parts of Calvert County also. And it is a corned ham, which is like a brined ham basically. And then it's stuffed with a mix of greens, like we were talking about, the cabbage, kale, cress, onions,
peppers, celery.
Peppers, mustard seed. I guess that's really
celery seed, hot peppers.
Oh yeah, gotta have the celery seed. Yeah, there we go. I knew there was another big thing in there, and then boiled for an eternity because it's a huge ham. And usually it's served sliced, cold. You can put it on sandwiches, and people do all kinds of things with it. Put it in fried rice and egg rolls and
That
stuff,
sounds
or put it on
awesome.
pizza down there. So it's just such a hyper local part of the culture.
Mhm.
And it came from there's these Catholic plantations, and it came from the people who were enslaved on these Catholic plantations, and made its way through the rest of the local culture to everybody else pretty much. But pretty much everyone agrees, that it was started by the people who were enslaved there. And now it's just this symbolic traditional food. And it's so kind of, I don't want to intimidate people because we have the recipe in the book, but it
Right.
is difficult to make. So it's time consuming, and that prevents it from being really commodified, which I love about it.
True.
Because you're not going to have Kentucky Fried Chicken having their own version of Maryland stuffed ham
Right.
anytime soon. It's just
No, they'll
not-
figure out a way if it gets popular.
Yeah. Well, remember the McDonald's crab cake? That didn't go over so
God,
well.
that was terrible.
I don't think I tried it, but I do remember the signs.
But the way the recipe is written out, like it doesn't seem terribly, if you're used to, making a roulade or tying any sort of meat, like that's the hardest part. And that's like, I think a lot of people are intimidated by using kitchen twine, but it's just, you're just tying a bunch of knots.
Yeah. And in this case, you're just putting it in like an old t-shirt or some cheesecloth or something. So
Yeah.
I think she says in the recipe header, you can do this. And I fully believe that
Yeah.
people can do it if they give it a try. And
I was actually surprised by using it as like a sandwich filling.
yeah, what is great about it is if you put it on a sandwich with like pardon me, I am okay with mayonnaise. I know that's like some people really hate on mayonnaise, but if you put it on bread with like a nice thick layer of mayonnaise, it basically forms its own ham salad.
Yeah, ham and mayonnaise are best friends.
Yeah.
Hamnaise.
It's like its own salad because it's got the vegetables in it and everything. So
yeah, no, totally. Yeah, I like the idea. Like, and it was weird because in my head, because I've only had like, I guess a couple slices of it wherever the place that I tried it at. But in my head, it's like, a thing that you have at Christmas or whatever that's like, here's a slice for you. And then you eat the one slice with the stuff in it and that's it. But like the thought of like egg rolls or fried rice or like even just the sandwich, like, of course that makes obvious sense. Like fried rice with this sounds fucking bananas good.
Yeah. I mean, I think what happens is families in general are getting smaller, but hams are not. So, so you have a lot of leftovers when you make this, or if you're making it, some people make 3 and 4 at a time.
Whoa.
I have a friend down there who makes them and people in her community get them from her. So when people know she's going to make a ham, her other people in her extended family or her neighbors or whatever get them from her. So there's just a lot of ham going around and a lot of leftovers.
I do have one question about the process of making this. The liquor that's left over, what happens to that?
That is
because that sounds like gold.
Yeah, that is actually something that has been really painful to me because there's so much of it, but it totally is gold. You are correct. I've kept some of it and used it for this was so long ago. The last time I did a ham was like the spring before the pandemic, and I was with my family, and I wasn't. I think my cousins put the pot out back and left it, so it like.
Oh no!
Yeah, so I was like, keep that liquor.
It's like raccoons and shit in it.
Yes, yeah, I think they opened it a few days.
Well,
later.
it's Baltimore, so there's rats in it.
It was not good, but in previous times I've taken it and used it for stuff. Just use it like stock. It is. Yeah. That's what it is. It's stock. It's real, extremely salty and has all the greens in there. So
because in my brain it was like, okay, well this is perfect for like the the old trick of just sort of cooking it down to almost like so it's super concentrated and then putting it in ice cube trays.
Oh yeah, I guess that would really be the way to go, is to concentrate it. It's just so much that's really intimidating. But if you have have a pot that you can just leave on a burner for hours, then
yeah, because it's already in the big pot, right? So just cook it all down and then cube it, and then you basically have your own like because I use the better than bouillon stuff. It's basically
well, the delis the delis and stuff that make it, I imagine they probably
put it in everything.
I imagine they use the same water over and over. I'm not sure.
Well, yeah, that would make sense. But at some point, you gotta.
It's like have you ever been to crawfish boil where they do like each batch gets a little spicier through the night, and then like at the end of the night, it's like almost inedibly spicy because you just keep
or you're at like a
stuff in.
Szechuan place, and by the end of the night, their broth is like just rolling hell broth.
Yeah.
Like your tongue goes numb looking at it.
I should ask my friend who makes it. I'll have to ask her if she does anything. With
Because
shit,
liquor. You could sell that stuff.
Yeah, bottle it.
Yeah, totally. Were there any recipes in here that you were surprised about, or some of the stories that like you uncovered here that you really enjoyed and was like, it kind of like just uncovering this story was like, okay, the book was worth it because of that?
Well, originally when I was putting the book together, I wasn't sure how long I could afford to make it. I wasn't sure what all was going to happen with the design process. So I had one or two recipes that were like maybe things I could remove. And one of them was it's Mildred Haley's ginger cream cake. And it's just a cake that somebody tried on St. David's Day in 1981.
What's St. David's Day?
It is a Welsh holiday.
Okay.
And it's kind of a celebration of all things Welsh. So, I researched the lady whose recipe it was, and she actually did make this cake for different events for the Women's Welsh Club of Baltimore. But I did more research on Welsh people in Maryland, and I found all these records from like this mining company in the early 1900s of their miners celebrating St. David's Day. And of Welsh miners getting into fights with Cornish miners. And then apparently in
Maryland?
Yeah.
So up in Western Maryland.
Yes, this would be out by Frostburg.
Yeah.
So then...
Never heard of the place.
In Canton, apparently...
I'm joking. I went to Frostburg.
Oh, did you?
Yeah.
Okay. So Andrew, you live near Canton.
I've been up in the strip mines, yeah.
So there used to be a neighborhood in Canton called... the Welsh Colony.
Oh, okay.
By Toon Street.
Yeah.
And
it's right, it's down that way.
Yeah, in the newspaper I found like an old picture of it. It was like dilapidated at the time. So I had no idea that this was a community that was in Baltimore, and there's, this architectural heritage that's mostly gone. So it ended up kind of being one of my favorite stories.
But you had to kill it.
No.
Oh, no,
so
it's
I
there.
did not.
Yeah,
so,
page 78.
Yeah, so it was going to be the throwaway thing. It was going to be the sacrificial lamb, and I ended up like being one of the things that I was like, okay, well, the cake and its connection to this holiday is sort of tenuous. Like I said, there's a note in my cookbook that somebody made this cake on St. David's Day in 1981. So that was sort of not Maryland's most sacred of traditions, but it's a really neat story and a lot of backstory. There was also Welsh miners in Harford County, so it ties in different parts of the state, which is really interesting.
So let me back up and sort of explain the book. So the book is basically sort of a two-part book, right? Like there's an essay in the beginning of each recipe that is the story basically of how you found the recipe, right?
Yeah, or something
that ties
tangentially related.
That ties
if you're
into
familiar with my blog at all, this is basically what I do. So I choose
Old Line Plate, by the way.
Yes, oldlineplate.com. I choose a recipe and often not knowing what I'm getting into, and I try to kind of find an angle. And sometimes it's just like, this recipe has cabbage in it, so I'm writing about the cabbage industry in Maryland because I couldn't find anything about the person. Sometimes the person turns out to be like I accidentally
a cabbage.
Yeah, I accidentally found a recipe, not in this book, but recently. It turned out to be, for better or for worse, the recipe belonged to this woman who helped invent low-fat mozzarella.
Oh, wow.
I know.
That's interesting.
Yeah, so it was just funny. Sometimes I find all this information about these people, or sometimes there's stories about the holiday itself. Or the tradition itself could be oyster stew on Christmas, which is something I've written about before and is also in the book, or eggnog, and its connections to Maryland. So basically any combination of these different angles. But for this book, I went into a lot of oral histories. So, there's oral histories of people who grew up in Little Italy and in St. Mary's County. And I really enjoyed reading into those and tying these stories.
And the stories are a lot of fun to read. Like Your writing's great. It always has been, but it's like the way that the stories flow in this book before the recipes is really good. Like, I have to just say,
Thank
you did
you.
a fucking bang up job. It's
I worked
really
really
good.
hard on this, so that's good to hear.
Yeah.
You're one of the first readers. Really,
Oh, I'm
these will be getting out into
honored.
the world soon.
Yeah, it'll be shipping out soon to people.
Yeah, hopefully starting next week.
Nice. So this isn't going to come out until October. So
Yeah, the launch. Okay. The launch is on the 14th. I don't know if you're.
of October.
Yes.
Okay, this is going to come out the 13th.
Oh, all right.
Yeah. So tomorrow the book comes out.
Yeah.
Sweet. So the introductions by you of every recipe and with a little essay or a story, and then the recipe is done by a friend of the show, Rachel Rappaport, who does the what's the name of her blog?
Coconut and Lime.
Coconut and Lime
yeah,
blog.
She has she's done a lot of regional recipes that she has on her blog, Cotties, smear case cheesecake. So I often refer to her when I have some old recipe that's really vague or not very good. Like every time I try to make peach cake, the recipe that I find is terrible. And I follow the instructions and post my terrible peach cake, but I always have like a link that's like, if you really want to make this at home, this is what you should probably do. Follow her advice. So I asked for her help to make some recipes that people would actually want to make at home and to write them in a way that people can follow, because I'm not even capable of that at this point. I've looked at too many old recipes.
Right.
I don't even
take a thing, put in a thing, eat it.
Yeah, I don't even think of the steps of cooking as I'm doing it. I don't know how to backtrack to that point anymore. So that's, I called in the professionals.
It's really funny because recipe development, recipe writing has really only become a really, within the last 50 years, it's been a thing, but it's only become precise within like the last 20 or like the last 15. Like even up until Christ, the early 2000s, I have Tom Colicchio books and shit like that. It's just really vague. It's like, oh, a pinch of that and some of this.
Make a cream sauce.
Right. Like, okay, well, how the fuck do I do that? Like it assumes a lot of the person who's cooking, and yeah, that's just a bad way to go about it. So
yeah, I think home economists went a long way towards helping make recipes better, but at the same time, there's a lot of they assumed like a similar cultural heritage, which is probably a reason why recipes are written a little better now, because people don't take that for granted that everybody just knows how to make a cream sauce a certain way, or they're following a certain cooking tradition. So I think
not thinking that it might be the first time this person's ever trying this cuisine. They don't know what the fuck the reference point of that one part of the recipe is. Yeah, it's really weird. But yeah, so you got an introduction by John Shields, man. That is fucking rad.
I can't believe he said yes. That was I reached out to him. I guess in the fall, when this was all starting to really come together.
For those who don't know, John Shields, local chef who's pretty famous. He's probably
done public television. Yeah. He's really
books. Yeah.
My respect for him grows and grows because he's really kept a lot of this regional food alive.
Absolutely.
He is passionate about it. He's super knowledgeable about it. I actually made the other day for my blog, I made crab meltaways. Have you ever made those?
No.
So this is a recipe that would appear in a lot of 70s and 80s cookbooks, and you mix crab meat with butter and that canned old English cheese and put it on English muffins and then freeze it and then broil it.
Oh, okay. And so it just doesn't melt all over the place on you.
Yeah, exactly. So they're usually like a canapé. And I have it in all these community cookbooks. And then he has a version in his crab cookbook from the 90s. Because,
that's hilarious.
He's not he's not like a gimmicky, everything has to be from the earth, but he's also not, just the latest thing that come by.
Right.
Yeah, he has so much experience and respect for local foodways. So it was really awesome to get him involved.
It's super cool.
And he does a little cooking series that's online now that's great. It's called like Chesapeake Bites, and he does videos with different ingredients. And
I'll have to check that out.
Yeah, they're nice and short videos. Somebody needs to get him on TikTok, and he'll probably like get even more famous.
I like watching his videos because he's old school. He's like very relaxed, and it's very calming to watch him cook. It's like watching Jacques Pepin, like where you're like, this is a person who knows what the fuck they're doing. They're not doing this for clout. They're not doing this to like get all the hits. They're like, I fucking love this kind of food, and I want you to see how to do it.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, and they're not trying to rush through the thing or make too many jokes or, you know, where I would be like, if it was me, I'd be cocking it all up with like fucking poop jokes or whatever. It's just really cool to watch.
Yeah. Yeah. And he's just really excited by the food too.
Yeah. Okay. We're coming up on like, where are we at here? All right, we should get into eggnog because we didn't really get into it last time.
Yeah, so last time I was here, we brought up eggnog at the very end of the show, and I said I would come back and talk about eggnog crimes. So I would just get into it.
Yeah.
Because
and you have an eggnog recipe here.
Yeah, I actually saved the eggnog material and didn't put it into my last book because I knew I wanted it to be in here. Because I had so much fun when I researched eggnog and apple toddy, which was another regional beverage made from apples that are like soaked in Maryland rye.
Oh shit.
So people would put out huge bowls of these super potent beverages, and you know, everybody's closer to kind of agrarian times if you think about it. You know, this is back in the 1800s. So a lot of people are just pretty much fresh off the farm where they would have worked their fingers to the bone most of the year, but suddenly it's December and it's just party time.
Right.
So now we're all in a city, and like it would get super chaotic. There's all these news stories about like people just using firearms while they're drinking eggnog.
Well, that's not surprising. Well, there was like an eggnog rebellion.
Oh, I don't know about that one.
It happened at the Naval Academy in the 1800s. It's called the Eggnog Rebellion.
I'm too Baltimore centric. See, that's my problem. I
there's
I need to expand my horizons.
There's a American history comedy podcast that I listen to where they just take stories from American history that are just fucking bananas, and that was one of them. And all the food centric ones are really weird. So they just did one that was a couple weeks ago that was oyster based, and just how Maryland and New York just went fucking crazy for oysters for like 150 years, and pretty much killed all the oysters. But there, it was a thing called the Eggnog Rebellion. You should look into it. It's really weird. I'll send you the link.
I mean, I believe it because in the city, a lot of people seem to like successfully use the fact that they had too much eggnog to like
get away with
crimes. Yeah, like there's like he stole a horse and buggy, and you know, he was arrested for larceny, but he said he took too much eggnog, and it was just all in good fun. Or there's one story that was like two women of uneasy virtue, and one woman like owed another lady money, and they got in a fight, and like it's like she said she took too much eggnog, and she was fined $1, and they let her go.
Oh my god!
Which, you know, $1 might have been like $100.
I love the eggnog defense, though.
Yeah, it was. It was also people use it to poison each other. There was a story, I think it wasn't in Baltimore, it was in the Midwest, where some people tried to like spike some eggnog so that everybody would pass out and they could like rob them all.
Holy shit.
They didn't get away with it, and the story got picked up in other newspapers. So that's how I saw it in the Baltimore paper.
I'm looking at the eggnog recipe that's here. It seems like a normal, you know, strong eggnog recipe.
Yeah, so I did the beverage recipes, and this recipe is one that I quote unquote developed by taking all of the eggnog recipes that were in my database up to maybe this was 2017 or 18, and just like averaging the amounts.
Yeah.
So it's like the average amount of eggs, the average amount of liquor. If there's something weird in there, like evaporated milk, I would just leave it out, or cloves or whatever. But all the standard stuff, I just put the average amount. So that's basically what that eggnog recipe is. And I've made it several times, and it's, you know. So
before I kind of stopped, I had a cooking blog for a while too, which now it aggregates, the podcast aggregates to it now. And my most popular recipe was eggnog. and it's very close to this. Mine's like you make like fucking a gallon or two of it.
Yeah.
Like I would make it big, but this is an uncooked eggnog,
Yeah.
which I don't like cooked eggnogs. I like
I mean,
uncooked
I make,
eggnogs.
I don't know if it helps anything, but I'm like very careful to just like take the eggs and put the alcohol like directly on them, you know,
Mhm.
and just hopes that everything works out in the end.
If you
and
beat
also
everything together.
use the farmer's market eggs, which, you know.
So before you leave, if you want, I can give you a quart of eggnog that I made last year.
Oh, you're aging the egg.
And I age
Nice.
it, and it's amazing.
I mean, it's one of my favorites.
Yeah.
I need to start.
Everyone thinks I'm a fucking maniac, but I'll double the recipe every year. And then before I make another batch, it's pretty much almost gone. Like once it starts getting cold, I'll start hitting the eggnog again.
Nice.
I just love it. It's such a good flavor, and it's just like a nice thing at the end of the night. Like 1 or 2 glasses of it's all you need because it's super strong.
Yeah.
Because it's all bourbon and brandy.
Yeah, if you like a strong drink, I hope you check out the apple toddy recipe. That's in
Yeah, I
there,
will.
because that's one that also can be aged a year, and I have done that. I made a big, got one of the big homebrew jars, and I put the apples and everything in it and left it for a year, and it was just so fun to go to a party and take out this thing that had been waiting a year
Yep.
for that moment. And you're supposed to put it on ice and water it down a little bit.
But nobody does.
I mean, I do, but yeah,
Take shots.
certainly people did not, and that's thus all of the rampant crime and all these stories about, like, every New Year's was big for eggnog too.
Yeah.
Interestingly, yeah, and people would really go crazy with firecrackers and guns and stuff on New Year's, and they'd always mention the eggnog and apple toddy.
I remember the first time I actually had real eggnog that wasn't like just that garbage. Like growing up,
Yeah, the stuff in the milk cartons.
yeah, that then my mother would just dump into a bowl and then just dump some shitty, Wild Turkey or Canadian Club into it and then stir it up and then they would drink it, right? But, they would let me have it without the whiskey. And I don't even know. It doesn't even taste like eggnog.
I always loved it, but it's
No,
a whole
I-
different thing. There's like not any flavor profile to it.
Right.
other
That's what
than
I'm
just
saying.
Eggs and like a little nutmeg usually.
Like once a year I try it because somebody always has it at their house and I'll try it just for the nostalgia of it. Yep. Still tastes the same. But like these days I'm like, I don't even know what it's supposed like. Is it supposed to taste like whiskey or it doesn't taste like nutmeg? Like,
Yeah.
I don't know what they're basing. It's
It
like
tastes like melted ice cream.
kind of, yeah. But like there's a thing in it. I don't know what it's supposed to approximate. Like it's like if
There's
you
probably some vague like artificial brandy flavor
Maybe.
or something that we just
it's
take
like if
for
a
granted
kid
now.
tasted it and then 30 years later had a dream about it and then wrote the recipe from their dream. It's like the ghost of a drink of a person who's no longer alive. It's like a double ghost drink.
Well, it's become its own, it's its own special thing at this point. The grocery store eggnog.
Yeah.
I always get some, and
Yeah, it's like you're asleep and I'm sorry, I'm just going to go. I figured it out. It's like you're asleep and you're woken up by a ghost and a ghost tells you to write down the recipe for their eggnog recipe. And that's what carton convenience store eggnog tastes like.
with no alcohol.
With no
Yeah,
alcohol,
a
because they
temperance
were-
ghost.
Yeah, they were a teetotaler ghost. Thanks, Prudence. Yeah. I love eggnog though. But yeah, I love this. I love this book. It's great. Like the more I'm looking through it, okay, I do. What's the turkey stuff without oysters?
So you're not familiar with that?
No,
That's really interesting. Because
I'm
that's like
familiar with turkey stuffing. Is that what it is?
I mean, it's stuffing, yeah, with oysters in it.
Ugh.
That's just like a Maryland.
Oh no, I grew up with it. I hate it.
Okay.
Yeah.
But you're not like, what is?
No,
it?
I make it sometimes when my mother comes over for Thanksgiving. I'll make it just for her. I've never enjoyed it.
So yeah, as we touched on earlier, people used to stuff meats. There's an old dish called beef a la mode in particular that would be like chopped up oysters and parsley, and you kind of stuff.
A la mode.
Yeah, it was
Weird.
like a la mode circa like 1827.
Yeah.
Yeah, so people used to stuff meats with oysters. It was just like or anchovies, which is probably the better way to go. But this stuck around for Thanksgiving for whatever reason, especially in Maryland, and so it's just another place to throw some oysters.
Do you like oyster stuffing?
No.
Yeah, I've always found it really like wet.
Yeah, because you don't want to overcook the oysters.
Right.
Yeah, so it's a interesting like old taste. It's not my favorite thing, but I'm a little iffy on oysters, which is my big shame.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, see, I'll eat a bunch of oysters, like raw oysters. I love them. But like, it's funny because my wife and I talk about this all the time because our son will sit down and if he would eat 24 raw oysters by himself. He's a maniac about it. I don't know why.
Yeah, that's awesome. I don't know. Maybe they were like too much of a delicacy when I was growing up or something, and it wasn't really something we had around. It's also, my grandfather would fish, so we have plenty of fish, and we'd get crabs, but oysters are just, I don't know. We just didn't have them around so much. So by the time I tried one, I'm like, what is, so maybe my 2024 like New Year's resolution should be to like get into oysters.
When I was a kid, my first raw oyster was a dare. I was at a thing with the boys club. They took all us poor kids to a old sports thing. And do you know who Art Donovan is? He used to play, I think he was a linebacker for the Colts.
Okay.
And they were eating oysters and they found a little crab.
Oh, yeah. We had one time my uncle was making oysters Rockefeller. Like I'll eat that kind of stuff at his house. Yeah. And the little kind of almost drunk looking crab, because by the time you see them, they're like, what is going on? And the poor little crab. And I actually have recipes for those.
Really?
Because when oysters were wildly popular, these oyster houses, they would amass tons of them. So they would float a few on soup. Sometimes they're bright orange. They're either clear or sometimes they're orange. And yeah, I have recipes where they just say float 5 oyster crabs on top of the soup, or make an omelet with 40 of them.
Holy shit!
Yeah, I
guess if they're opening thousands of those a day, they're probably getting them, and they're just like, well, let's use them.
The main I have a few recipes, but the ones that I have a book that has a whole section on it, and it's actually from a chef a caterer in Philadelphia who worked at a hotel. Called the Boothby, and they owned a bunch of oyster land, not land, I guess, water, in like Chincoteague, Virginia, the people who owned this hotel. And so they must have just had so many, it was like famous. Crazy. It was the most famous oyster selection in like the world or something.
Wow.
And yeah, so his book has like 10 recipes for oyster crabs on them. And the omelet, I always remember because it's like 40 oyster crabs.
Yeah. Because they're small.
Yeah, they're also called a pea crab, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And maybe is that where oyster crackers are supposed to be?
I don't know about that.
Yeah, that would be weird, right? Like
I've never eaten the crab. We kind of, when we saw it, my family, we kind of like, ha ha, I bet this is a delicacy, and washed it down the drain or something.
Well, when I was a kid,
of course it's a delicacy.
Yeah, I was probably like 9 or 10, and Art Donovan, as a joke, was like, hey kid, I'll give you $5 or whatever if you eat this oyster with the crab in it. And I was like, okay. And boom, just ate it. And he was like, holy shit, he fucking did it. Oh kid, you're the greatest. And he signed the thing and then gave me $5 and was like, this kid's the fucking best. And I was like, I actually like that oyster taste. It's really good.
This is a really good story. This is one for my blog.
Yeah.
We'll have to recount this oral history to me, I think.
And then it got me
scenario, the football player, the crab.
Like I remember my uncle taking me down to Harbor Place when it first opened, and he would take us down, and in between beers he would get oysters, and me and my cousin would be like, and then he would like, okay, well you guys try them, and you try them, and you're like, oh okay, it's not the worst, but after that I was like, oh this is good. And Crosby's eaten them forever. My wife will only eat them raw. Maybe she'll eat them fried, but she doesn't like like oysters Rockefeller, or like she likes them either raw or like hard fried. Like she kind of doesn't like that middle ground.
I could see that.
But I'll make like okay. I knew oysters a lot when I was a kid just because they would come in cans. And, at the church or at the VFW, they would make oyster stew and they'd make fucking gallons of it in one of those big pots. And they're just pouring those big canned oysters in there. And I to this day, I love oyster stew.
I love oyster stew.
Which is super easy to make and it's super simple. It's just mirepoix, milk, oysters, maybe a little thickener.
Yeah, the oysters themselves are like they're like your stock and they're a starter, it's like nature's canned soup basically. The oysters are. So oyster stew is a great one, and we have that in the book because that used to be a big Christmas thing.
Yeah, I think that's when they would make it around the holidays. Yeah. Oh wow, I just had a big nostalgia. Yeah, that was awesome.
Well, that's great if something tangentially related to my book gets anybody on a weird nostalgia thing.
That's cool. So did I ask you what your favorite recipe out of this was?
So my favorite, from what Rachel has done in particular, is the Fastnacks. Those are a kind of German originating donut made for Shrove Tuesday or Fat Tuesday. Basically, you use up all the fats, so they say. And my family has been making those since my mom and her sisters were kids. So it was something they always talked about. And then I got together with my aunt, my cousin, and we made them.
What are they called?
Fastnacks. They're called Kinklings in the book. So,
okay.
So in Western Maryland, they're weirdly called Kinklings. And they're kind of like
never heard of them.
Yeah, they're kind of like one of those Pennsylvania Dutch type Germanic influenced recipes. And so my family, I thought this was like some ancient tradition, but it turned out that it got into my family like in the 60s from a newspaper column, and they just started making them and loved them. But Rachel took the recipe and really made something that's even lighter and fluffier.
So they're potato.
Yeah, they're potato based. Well, not all recipes are, but the one that we always used was, a lot of these. There's not too many recipes for them in cookbooks. They're just not one of those things that people wrote down. One of the, as I mentioned in the story, I have a recipe called like Quick Kinklins. And the only reason it's in that cookbook is because they made it with baking powder instead of yeast. So they're probably terrible, but otherwise they're not bothering to write these recipes, and they're not like a prestigious thing that would make it into a Maryland cookbook that, was making the state famous, like crabs.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So it wasn't one of those recipes that people really bragged about or anything. They sometimes would make it into little scrapbooks, or somebody wrote down their mother's recipes. But they're interesting, like somewhat lesser known Maryland thing. But in Frederick, they do celebrate Kinkling Day, and you can get them at a couple bakeries.
Oh, that's awesome. It's so funny because, like, when people think of Maryland, they do think of crabs and crab cakes and, seafood stuff. But I even saw the other day, there was a friend of ours who was like, we're known for cod cakes? Like, really?
Coddies.
And I was like, you've never heard of coddies, dude? And he's like, but are we known for that? And I was like, I think it's just the way that we eat them, just on a cracker with mustard, because it's such a weird way to eat them.
Yeah, and Baltimore also has a reputation for our coddies having a lower amount of actual cod in them.
It's mainly potato.
Which recipes that I have kind of vary on that. But I think traditionally, they're pretty much potato cakes that are flavored vaguely with cod. And I love them because they're like, I would go to Lexington Market to buy ingredients. So I would be in there too often to spring for a crab cake.
Right.
So the coddies were always my go-to because that's like a cheap lunch, coddy and some deviled eggs.
Yeah, growing up, the corner store on my street in Baltimore would get a tray of them every day. And, they cost 25 cents for two or whatever the hell it was.
Oh, you should be posting in one of these old people Facebook groups.
Oh, yeah. Do you remember?
Yeah.
Oh, the good old days.
They love the coddy. People mention the coddies and the Cohen's coddies, and they were a nickel.
But I don't know where they got them from, because I can't imagine they were the ones that were making them.
There was a company called Cohen's Coddies that
is that what it was?
Distributed them somewhat regionally. So I'm not sure when they stopped producing them. I have to look,
because they were fresh every day.
Yeah,
my mother still gets them. Like, she'll be like, "I bought you a bag of coddies," and I'm super happy. But it's like a bag, and it's literally just a bag of coddies. you know.
That's great.
But they're great to pop in the oven and crisp up, and then, you know, who doesn't like a croquette, basically?
Yeah, and they're a great vehicle for really enjoying mustard.
Yeah. Oh, no, without a doubt.
Yeah, which, you know, you don't think about it, but mustard, like, is like this really powerful condiment that kind of gets, like, minimized in life. And in the Cotty, it really gets to shine. When
I was in college, my mother would send me to college with a bunch of them, and I would put them in the freezer. And when I would come home drunk from the bar, I would take 2 of them, put them on a plate, top them with American cheese, microwave the shit out of them, and just eat them on bread with mustard.
Oh, and I bet they soaked up all the alcohol in your stomach too, because they'll really dessicate, you know, your mouth. They're so kind of dry and potatoey. So yeah, I'm sure that
perfect end of the night sandwich, garbage microwaved Cotty cake with cheese and mustard. Oh.
Do they make things smell like cod? Is that like microwaving fish taboo?
No, because like you said, it wasn't. There's not a ton of cod in there. It's just mainly potato. They just wave the cod around it as they're making it. They're just like, all right, that was good enough. Okay, so I'm super excited to talk about this. I'm glad you shared this with me. You should be really proud of this. This is a really great book.
Yeah, I'm so proud of the book and the work that everyone put into it. My friend Ben did the illustrations of the food,
which are really cool.
Instead of doing those food photography of like a, bowl on a table, we drew stuff in dishes, and he used a lot of the dishes that I have at my house.
There's really?
Like little, what's it called? Corningware or whatever.
Mm-hmm. I like the incorporation of like all the text and, some of the old school recipes and the pictures and the actual books that, you've gotten some of this from.
Yeah, we found some great photos of just people celebrating in Maryland. I looked
the creepy old Saint Nick with the plum pudding.
Oh yeah.
He's
Sarah
great.
Found that. She found some great plum pudding ephemera.
Yeah, it's great. Tell people where they can buy the book.
So I have it on my website at oldlineplate.com. It'll also be at regional bookstores. Atomic will be selling it. A couple other local bookstores ordered it. Grady Reads. There's a bookstore in Frederick called The Curious Iguana that ordered copies. The Bold Fork in DC. But also, if you know a local bookstore and they would like to order copies, certainly have them get in touch with me, because I think you've seen the book. I think is the type of thing that when people see it, they're kind of going to get it more than just ordering it sight unseen. So I'm hoping to get more copies into bookstores, but you can also get it at my site.
Awesome. And your site is?
oldlineplate.com.
Hell yeah. And that's it for I guess the beginning of the 8th season of the Rude Cooking School podcast.
Congratulations.
Holy shit,
that's awesome.
Thanks. This is episode 301. I've wasted so much of my life.
That's so much work. That's
but thank you for coming on. I really appreciate it. Anytime you want to come on the show to promote whatever you want, or just to bullshit about like some old recipes.
Yeah, we should just do a quarterly like nostalgia special where we just talk about
I'm already penning you in for around Christmas time, by the way.
Yeah, works for me. There's all these old stuff, and it's really cool that you have personal experience with so much of this stuff. The Cotty, you have multiple good Cotty stories and an oyster crab story. So,
I'm from Baltimore, hon.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, so many stupid food stories. But thank you for listening to the Rude Cooking School podcast. We're going to be doing some new things. I'm going to be starting some things that I'm going to talk about. I'm probably going to add on to the end of this episode, because as of right now, I don't have the thing finished because I'm being responsible in recording beforehand. I'm going to build up a bank of things so I don't have to skip weeks, because it drives me fucking insane when I miss a week. So I will tell you all about that when it comes. But as usual, please tell your friends and your family to listen to the podcast. Now that we're back, we're going to be chugging them out every week and having a lot of fun. And if your friend or your family or your dog loves food and likes to hear about food, please tell them about it. Word of mouth is how we get out there. I don't pay for commercials or any of that stuff. So do that and join the Facebook group. It's awesome. It's really helpful. It's the only place on the whole internet that is actually nurturing and nice.
It's fun. I post there.
Yeah, you do all the time. It's really nice. And people are kind to each other and helpful, and they're not, being assholes. So come and join and hang out with us and post dumb memes and real recipes and genuine questions, and people will answer them. So for the Rude Cooking School podcast, I'm John Hauser III.
And I am Kara Mae Harris.
Hell yeah. Don't yuck my yum and garbage everything, everybody. See you next week. Peace.